putting on your mask. Are you going to go somewhere? No, go ahead. We'll have more fun without you. Just kidding. Sorry, Jordan made me late. I think if we're good to go.
Yes, sir.
Call to order at 5:05 for the City Council special meeting of Monday, May 17th, 2021. Madam Clerk, can you please call roll? Call the roll. Excuse me.
Mayor Turco.
Here. Here. And City Manager Simmons, are you presenting or is Craig presenting?
Mr. Mayor, I have a few comments. Just start, and then I'll be kicking it over to Craig.
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for joining us today for the first look at the 2021-2022 fiscal budget. This is a starting point for us to move forward and to get ourselves to a operational budget before the start of the new fiscal year. I want to thank the council for being available to have conversations about the budget, just different ideas that have come up. I really do appreciate the free flowing of ideas. I do want to reiterate that this is a starting point. After this, we will be having one-on-one meetings with each one of the council members in order to dig deeper into particular areas of interest within the budget with you. From then, bring those suggestions and those ideas back to the Budget Standing Committee for consideration before bringing the entire package back to the City Council for adoption in June. Again, the council's done an excellent job in providing us a framework to work within through the establishment of the fiscal stabilization plan. It really, I think, broke through and kind of captured what exactly the community is looking to achieve here this year and as we move forward. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Craig.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and City staff. I'm pleased to present the preliminary budget for fiscal year 21-22 and 22-23. Tonight we'll be taking a look back at the past budget gap and the projections that were made with, and also the passage of Measure Y. We want to look forward, of course, to review the draft budget for fiscal 21-22, look at the draft capital improvement plan program, and then also review where the city's reserves are projected. If you take a look at this slide, this reminds everybody this is what was projected originally before Measure Y was passed. The city was facing deficits in fiscal 21-22 and even before that. 1.6 million in fiscal 21-22. As you can see, those deficits were growing and escalating each year for the 5 years that were projected. This chart represents kind of a look at the revenues and expenses and also the reserves. So the revenue line is the blue line, the gray line is the expenses, the orange bars are the revenues. You can see that the expenses clearly were exceeding the revenues and the reserves were declining, and in the fourth year out we would have depleted our reserves and we would have been into the red area. So main takeaways from this, although the city was actively at
real loud, Craig, and right into the mic, please.
Okay, is this better?
Thank you. For those of us that are deaf.
The main takeaways from this, although the city had been actively cutting costs for the past 10 years, revenues were not simply keeping pace with the cost of services. Even in the last budget cycle alone in fiscal 2021, we had to make over $1.4 million in targeted cuts in order to balance the budget. That was included the equivalent of 19 full-time staff positions. This practice has led to significant reduction in the amount of needed infrastructure projects that the city could undertake. Even with these costs, further serious deep cuts of services and programs would have been required this year and into the future in order to maintain solvency. So with this, then Measure Y came along, prudently, the City of Los Alamitos and the residents took action, placed Measure Y on the November 2020 ballot. The residents voted to enact a 1.5% sales tax. It provides needed funding for essential city services. It's important, most importantly, it's local control of the revenue. This cannot be taken away by the state, and assures Los Al residents the quality of life that they expect. When we layer back in the previous chart you'd seen, adding back in the Measure Y, those deficits for the first year would now become a surplus. So fiscal 21-22, adding in the estimated Measure Y for the first fiscal year, we'd have a projected surplus of 2.7 million, and you can see the first 5 years going out, surpluses as well. That same chart we showed earlier, this is the revenues and expenditures. Now that's been inverted. The blue line is the revenues is on top, exceeding the expenditures. As you can see, the reserve line is growing and is no longer in the red.
Hey, Craig, can we go back one slide? I just have one quick question. Yeah, on this slide, so this is not taking into account the budget that we're discussing tonight for 2022, 2023, and 2021, 2022, correct?
No, all this does is simply take that same slide that we used for Measure Y and show the effect of adding in Measure Y to what the effect would be.
Okay, so these are the projections that we had before Measure Y, and now you're adding in Measure Y to show what the change is there.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're proposing is a 2-year budget cycle. The proposed budget reflects 2 fiscal years. This will be the first time the city has prepared a 2-year budget. It's going to assist the city in focusing on short-term and long-term goals while allowing for more strategic deployment of available funding. It aligns with the deployment of the capital improvement program, allowing for a more methodical approach to planning projects, and it leads to more consistent citywide priorities and goals. Taking a look at the economy as we move forward, the economy is growing at the fastest in recent history, with over 33% in real GDP growth in the third quarter of 2020. As vaccine rollout continues, California's unemployment rate will continue to fall and also reflect slow, gradual improvement as the year progresses. State's housing market has been by far the largest, highest, brightest spot of the 2020 economy. While some categories are showing growth, others will obviously be slower in returning to past productivity levels. On the bright side, construction and building supplies have seen significant upticks in activity recently. Some business sectors, such as business travel, may take up to almost 3 years to recover to pre-COVID levels. So the contributing factors of this to the improving economy are given here. Widespread distribution of vaccine, obviously. Case and positivity rates have remained very low. The full reopening has been announced for June 15th, and we're obviously applying lessons learned over the past year, which is helping us through this. Looking forward for the 21-22 revenue projection. Property taxes, sales and use taxes, licenses and permits will all lead with positive growth. Growth is projected for the secured property tax, while transfer and supplemental taxes will estimated to remain flat. Sales and use taxes reflect continued positive growth as well. This is mainly attributable to building and construction, and also growth in the county pools. License and permits are forecast to improve as business activity continues to increase. Projections show a 2 to 3% increase year over year. Some revenue categories will be down and will be slower to recover, given TOT, business travel, slow to rebound. And then charges for services obviously are dependent upon the recreation programs and classes reopening. This also reflects the full 4 quarters of local sales tax Measure Y for 21-22. This next is a chart of the projection for revenue projections for 21-22, projecting $18.9 million total revenues and transfers in. Of that, property taxes, sales and use taxes, Measure Y local sales tax amount to over 60% of the total revenues. So the main takeaways for the projections are that the revenues mainly coming from the infusion of Measure Y, obviously. There's a small cumulative increase from the prior modeling that's related to all revenue categories when factoring out Measure Y. This further improves the city's overall revenue projected picture related to the previous model, and shows us that the growth in other revenue categories are also projected as overall economy improves and grows. On the expenditure side, this was given the city council's direction. I'm sorry, lost the slide here. There are two important dates to remember. On October 19th, 2020, and again on January 19, 2021, the city council unanimously approved the fiscal sustainability pledge. It provides important facets for the city to move forward in its planning, provides for public safety, including maintaining Los Alamitos' emergency response times and enhanced neighborhood patrols. Given the City Council's direction, the Fiscal Sustainability Plan, or FSP, has served as the starting point for the development of this year's budget. As such, the proposed budget looks to address some important issues. One is the city's need to develop an agile organization that has the capacity to effectively address service needs of our residents while allowing for flexibility to address new challenges. Also formalizing past restructuring efforts that have been proven successful, and identify and address organizational deficiency that would hinder achieving the goals set forth in the Fiscal Sustainability Plan. Sorry, cutting in and out here. Yeah. So now I think we're going to look at each department presenting their own budget.
Just before we get started with administration, does anyone have any questions on the council? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The title change from it was originally city manager / city clerk to administration just seems to be a more in kind with our best practices of our naming kind of apparatus within the local government circles. Within this grouping, you will find that we have all of the support functions that necessarily fall within the city manager's office and in the city clerk's office. Predominantly, it focuses on our risk management, HR, IT, communications, general city administration, and then obviously all of the functions that happen within the city clerk's office, being our transparency efforts, all of our reporting efforts, and then obviously all the mandates that come to us under the Brown Act. This organization, or this piece of the organization, will be charged with ensuring that we are moving the city forward in line with the city's approved budget, and then also ensuring that we are taking stock of the rapidly changing landscape that we're seeing with regards to funding that's coming from both the state and the federal government. I'm really excited to see some of the changes that we've been able to pull together here in a relatively short amount of time. I think reordering a lot of the way that we go about doing the business of the city, I think, will be vastly improved by moving to a slightly different model than we currently have. What's being proposed underneath this budget, next slide, please. One more, please. Is to actually look at a structure that allows for a formalization of how exactly we manage some of the city's most critical functions. Namely our HR departments, our HR division, our IT division, also how exactly we handle communications with our residents. We would be looking to add an admin services director or manager, which would take on those functions and also be able to support any number of the operations and special projects that are coming out of the city manager's office. On the city clerk's side, we would be looking to add some support As you know, we currently are running with one person in the clerk's department. That obviously can be a difficult balancing act in order to put forward, simply because of the number of PRAs that we are actually receiving now, and then not to mention the load of new legislation that is actually coming down from the state government. These are things that we need to track, that we need to be able to respond to in a very nimble fashion, and having that backup support would be helpful in achieving those goals.
Chet, can we stop you there?
Yes.
I've got the 4 full-time staff. I'm understanding that. But then under part-time
Ron, I don't know if we can hear you that well. I'm right next to you and I can barely hear you.
I've got green.
Maybe if you get closer to it.
Maybe, how are we doing? Can we get this mic turned up a little higher? Higher? Is that better? Maybe we're going to need to change out the microphone.
I think that is correct.
Actually, Mr. Beach, yours is a wired microphone. If you move it a little bit closer to your mouth, we'll be able to hear you better.
How's that?
Much better.
Okay. Under part-time staff, there are 2 positions that are noted, and then 1 clerical assistant that is being proposed. My question there is, it's not clear if those are all half-time positions or not. So are we talking about 2 receptionist positions half-time and then 1 clerical assistant position half-time?
That is correct.
Okay, that needs to be clarified there, because you got up on top 2 part-time position staff, and I think it needs to be clear that that's a half-time position, a regular half-time position. Okay, my 2 cents.
Perfect. We can definitely add that notation.
Yeah, and those comments I've got almost all the way through here, and I'll make them as we go through, because we've mixed the full-time and part-time staff, and it's very difficult to separate them out when we're going through this presentation, because I'm a few pages ahead.
No, I do take your point, and I think that one thing that we will be working on and providing to all the council members before we get to the next iteration of this presentation will be a position control list that will
Thank you.
include both full-time staffing, looking backwards and looking forward as to what's proposed, but also a breakdown of what exactly the part-time positions mean in terms of cost, in terms of overall cost. Because obviously different part-time positions are, as you're noting, are worked, some are regular part-time and some are seasonal part-time or depending upon need. So yes.
Right. And I would just say that just from a budgetary point of view, if they're hourly employees part-time, I think that's covered in the back of the first presentation you sent us, where you've listed the rate for hourly employees.
Right.
And as long as the budget's there for that department and the city manager gives the okay, that's completely within standard protocol for using temporary part-time people to help the city when they're needed.
Right.
Okay.
And we can provide a better, or I'll say it this way, a clearer picture of what
Thank
those
you.
numbers are.
Thank you.
Of course. Some of the goals, obviously, within the city manager's office is to try to develop an organization that allows us to quickly respond to needs as they come up, but also allows us to really dig in and be able to accomplish some of the goals that are set forth by the City Council and the FSP, namely ensuring that our communication and the different programs and the projects are actually properly supported moving forward. And within the city clerk's office, obviously transparency is going to be the key for us moving forward, especially as we start to change a lot of the way that we put together our information pieces, and then also the way that we manage our employees going forward.
Just, Mr. Mayor, if I may, one additional comment. I notice as we go through, you're proposing different approaches to each department to try to staff up to handle the additional workload. I guess that maybe later this week or early next week, the county may be moving into the yellow tier for COVID. I guess my point would be is I'm hoping that before we actually fill these, assuming that the council has approved many of these additions that are in the budget, that we'll wait until all the staff is back in place, fully staffed up and working, so that we're really convinced that those positions are needed based on the workload with full-time staff working. So that would be my other comment in looking at all this.
Yes, sir. With that, and turn it over to the Finance Department.
Okay, the Finance Department, some highlights. The department issues over 2,000 checks, warrant accounts payable checks annually, managing cash and investments over 12.6 million portfolio, administer a debt for 3.4 million, manage over 22 separate funds for the city, prepare obviously the budget annually, and also the city's continuously has received the Certificate of Achievement for Financial Reporting awarded by the Government Finance Officers Association. So some of the finance goals that we're proposing is looking at processing enhancements, electronic payroll, I think is one of the big ones. Going to paperless checks would be issued direct deposits to the employees, and they would receive rather than a paper stub, they would receive a email with the stub. So cut down on costs for envelopes and such. Also possibly look into e-disbursements along the same lines. Improve internal processes to create efficiencies, improve customer service levels, enhance budgeting tools to streamline budgeting process, looking at real-time reporting, additional levels of transparency, additional cost containment, ongoing reviews of cost allocations, doing an RFP for banking and other services. So under the finance, expenditures reflect the addition of a part-time special projects coordinator that was frozen with the 2021 budget. Also an upgrade of a finance assistant to senior finance assistant. This will provide additional monitoring for best practices and separation of duties, and other expenditure increases reflect higher pension and benefit costs and higher costs projected for contractual services.
If I might just comment on that one. Again, when we put that in the budget, I think we need to make that clear that it's a reclassification. It's not a new position, just a reclassification from a finance assistant to a senior finance assistant. And that would be reflected in the personnel control list that's put together for the city. That would be great. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you. So, real quickly, the department consists of 3 full-time staff, interim director, an accountant, Ryan Phillips, finance assistant, which is proposing to reclass Norma Morello, and then proposing to add the special projects coordinator back to the department. Looking forward, changes within the department with this proposed position, we would add monitoring for best practices, separation of duties that was so evidently pointed out in the last audit. Special projects such as an RFP for fee cost recovery, further streamlining department operations, developing written job procedures for all finance operations, and ongoing audits of internal service fund charges and other cost containments.
All right, now Development Services. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Just a real quick recap. So the past year or so, we've been going through the COVID-19 pandemic, but the city, the Development Services Department, have been operating. And so there's some statistics there. I'm not going to go over everything. We still did sidewalk concrete repair. We still paved streets. We still did building or home inspection when someone wanted a permit. So again, we were still operating as best as we can without the COVID and pandemic. The next slide here is, so one of the things that I encountered when I transferred over from Recreation and Community Services was the need, even though we did a good job, to increase customer service or the resident experience. So building and safety, the goal there is to increase the resident or business experience by getting new software so people can do online payment, they can do online appointments so for building inspection, and now of course online building checks. As we move over to the next department, or is code enforcement, again, they do a very good job reaching out, but I think that we can improve. So again, this is a software upgrade where residents can submit an online ticket for code violations. And then, of course, through this software, they can get updates on the status of their concerns. As we move over to the economic development plan, we have a very ambitious economic development plan to increase our relationship with businesses and nonprofits in the city. And the big one that I want to highlight is the outreach part of it, right? So the outreach is, again, increased communication with businesses, whether we're partnering with the Recreation Community Services, with events, or just emails, or attending chamber breakfasts, etc. So that's the big one. But we also have other plans in the mix, as you could detail with your handout, that we have some economic development plans that we're coming forth in the next fiscal year. Moving on to engineering services, we split engineering services into two categories. One I call the Measure Y, and you can see some of it right there, which is a citywide paving, street crosswalk striping, and overhead arterial sign. And again, with the blessing of the council, Rare Development Services is ready to enter into this projects. And then, of course, we have our typical capital improvement project list as well. And as you can see there on the list, it goes from, completing the generator project. My handout's really small.
Yeah, if you could make that a little larger for us, Ron,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Not
so-
only can I hear, but I don't see very well either, and between the two, it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to read that.
Correct. But, the CIP project is, I think there's a Laurel Park Tennis Court project in there. Like I said, they're finishing up the generator project and a few other, again, projects. So one of the things I want to notice with our capital improvement projects is in the past, traditionally we spend about $350,000 CIP projects. We have a very, very aggressive a slate of projects coming up, and it's totaling $1.6 million. So as you can see, we are having a very ambitious timeline. I'm very confident that we're able to do so. And I also want to note that out of that 1.6, only about 240,000 of it is coming from general fund. So most of the fund is coming from an alternate route of money that's not tied into the general fund. All right, and then we go into planning. We have a lot of planning going on. We have active transportation plan. We're currently we're going to apply for grants to implement the ATP. We're currently in the town center development plan. We just kicked off the housing plan, but there's a couple other plans that the planning department is going to take the lead in, and including that is a citywide neighborhood signage project, where each neighborhood will hopefully get a signage distinguishing their neighborhood. Moving on to the public works, again, we have a very ambitious project list for public works, starting with the median projects. That's going to be in 3 or 4 different phases, but we're hoping to beautify the median projects. And of course, we have curb painting, making the Los Alamitos a Tree USA city again. And again, software will also be included in the public works, where a resident or a business can submit work order requests and get the status of their work order request through this software as well. So, like I mentioned before, a couple things that I noticed coming into development services was outreach, and of course, we oversee a lot of contracts. So, management of contract is something that we need to improve upon. So, this is the proposal of adding on additional staff to assist with the outreach to businesses and, of course, the contract management. If you can move over to the next slide, Craig, you can see that the ones highlighted in red is proposed is a development services manager, a public works supervisor, and a public work maintenance. And just piggybacking on what Councilmember Bates stated, the public works supervisor is just a reclassification of a position. And if you go to our last slide here, it's the part-timers here that we're adding on. I just want to point out that the special project coordinator is proposed is going to be dealing with and assisting with economic development. That's going to be their forte.
Ron, for that, if I look at the preliminary budget information you gave us and compare it with what you're giving us now, they don't match. So I guess my question is, are these existing positions that you're just requesting be unfrozen so they can be filled, or are these new positions?
Are we talking about the part-timers or
I'm
both?
talking about code enforcement, clerical assistant DS, and special projects coordinator ED.
So the clerical assistant and the special project coordinator ED are new positions, part-time new position. The code enforcement is, we actually budgeted a full-time code enforcement officer in the budget, but I'm just splitting that up into 3 separate part-timers. So it's sort of a reclassification.
You're going to have to come on that one again. Now, so you had
We have a full-time
code
enforcement officer budgeted,
Right.
but we're not going to go towards that route of full-time. I split that into 3 part-time positions.
So you're adding a half-time position, so you end up with, you had 1 full-time approved, so now you're asking that that be unfrozen and changed to 2 half-time positions, and then you're adding a new half-time position.
That is correct.
Okay, so when we redo this, hopefully that'll be reflected in here that way.
Copy that.
Thank you.
That is done. Now I can take any questions if anyone has any. All right, thank you.
For Recreation and Community Services, good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. The Los Alamitos Recreation and Community Services Department rose up to the challenge to inspire, engage, and unite the community during COVID-19. Throughout the past year, the team put their best creative hats on and pivoted and planned programs, classes, and events virtually and in person as the tiers changed and kept the community safe. This next slide is, I'm sorry, can you back up one, Craig? This is our stats slide. This is the average number of participants we serve on an annual basis based on daily attendance as reported in the CAFR. Next slide. During COVID-19, we were able to offer day camp, preschool, youth sports, senior grocery programs serving 180 families weekly, pet vet clinics, donation drives. Next slide. And more recently, opening back up with senior balance and fitness, popular staff-taught classes that filled a void when during COVID contract class instructors discontinued their classes and camps. And these staff-taught classes are well attended and some have filled up to capacity. We were able to pivot as needed based on the tiers and restrictions and provide physical activity to children during hybrid learning and keep youth active and engaged. Next slide. From a drive-by zoo to 100 plus YouTube classes, summer parks, camp in a box activities, senior club Zoom, social media contests, recognizing the graduation of Los Alamitos High School seniors, and our virtual community center, we never stopped serving our community virtually and in person. Next slide. The red, white, blue, and youth Shining Star Essential Workers recognition. We provided for banners, ribbons, recognition days, postcards at every doorstep to make sure we recognize the essential workers who also never stopped serving our community during COVID. Next slide. Just to highlight some of our community events that many of you did attend, thank you. Our 4th of July Fireworks Spectacular, Winter Wonderland, celebrating our zip code date 90720 and our 60th anniversary, drive-through trunk or treat, spring carnival, drive-up senior club bingo, drive-up preschool graduation, drive-up music and movies, July Parks Make Life Better Month activities, Escape Los Al, Film and Food Fest, Serve Los Al, Family Day, Halloween and holiday decorating contest, and providing support to local Los Alamitos Unified Elementary School events, just to name a few. Next slide. We also were able to complete in-house with the help of Public Works and our recreation staff lobby renovation that you all are able to enjoy and the community has welcomed with great feedback. Next slide. We've also continued our community partnerships with the Chamber, the Base, the school district, our sponsors, and nonprofits through the Serve La Salle Committee and neighboring communities. Next slide. And we've received recognition throughout the state of California. We have awards presented tonight from California Park and Recreation Society. And we were definitely a model city for many of the cities looking to offer safe programming during COVID. Next slide. These are our goals for the next 2 years. They are color-coded by fiscal year, but some of the goals that we have to further enhance the quality of life for Los Alamitos residents include senior transportation, expanded senior activities, teen classes, events, health and fitness activities, establishing a city foundation, cultural arts, community-wide events such as Week of La Salle and Street Fair, adaptive recreation, summer swim lessons, mobile rec classes, expand to staff-taught enrichment classes, and we just actually launched our new MyRec online registration software that is going well. Next slide. These are a couple of our new events coming up. We are bringing the race back onto the streets of La Salle for our 40th anniversary. Next slide. And for fiscal year 21-22, we are filling the vacancy of the manager and also adding a new recreation coordinator specializing in graphics and media, and will help to assist with graphics for citywide. Next slide. And that actually,
Emmeline,
yes.
Same comments, is that if we look at the preliminary budget information that was given to us, it talks about the recreation manager being added and the recreation coordinator for media. So those two are acknowledged. But then it has a number of other positions, a recreation supervisor, and then some additional coordinators. Certainly, trying to get your programs back in operation after COVID, you're going to need some of these positions. I just think we need, again, to make it clear which are just being unfrozen, they already exist, and which are being added to the budget, so we have a new position control that actually matches what's happening in the department. So thank you, and thanks for all your work.
Thank you, will do.
Yeah, Emmeline, just a question on that. In the staff report, it does say expenditures include the addition of one recreation manager and recreation coordinator, but on the PowerPoint, it shows 3 recreation coordinators.
So that's actually in fiscal year 22-23 to add the 2 other coordinators.
Okay.
But fiscal year 21-22 is the 1 coordinator.
Okay.
Mark, or Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry if I can comment too. This slide, actually, we had some edits that needed to be made to it, and I think we were trying to thread the needle to kind of Councilman Bates' comments about what is current and what is a past position, and this slide actually just needs to be edited again. Those last 2 positions are not part of the presentation.
So when we take action, Chet,
Yes, sir.
we're going to be approving the 21-22 fiscal year budget, and that's what needs to be in here.
Exactly.
Certainly, you can reference the 22-23,
Right.
but what we're taking action on is 21-22, so hopefully that'll get reflected in here.
Yes, sir.
That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Madam Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. The police department is probably best described as it's simple as it is complicated, but I'm going to try to give you the high view of this really and touch on the important points. The first slide is administration, which you're probably all familiar with. It's me and my 2 captains and my department secretary, and the things that we're involved in obviously are the policy, training, transparency, mission, the morale of the department, and accountability, as well as our department budget, which you can see in red is what's being proposed. And if we go to the next slide, is our support services, and I always call it support services, and I was pretty fond of working this job as a captain myself because it's like the business of running the business of the police department. And you also have a little bit of policing because he does, right now it's Captain Byerly in that position. He does the criminal investigation portion of it with our detective bureau, handles the administrative investigations, community outreach, records and property. And if you look, there are a lot of the contract services that are being taken care of, such as Westcom, CAT RMS, as well as some of our facilities and fleet, kind of the infrastructure of the building, also to include budget and grants when we are actually qualified to get some of those. It's the problem, right? We don't have enough crime or enough areas that are considered blight in this city, which is a great thing. But as a result, we don't have, or entrenched gangs, we don't have the ability to qualify for some of those grants for that. But that's, and personnel training is what support services is oversees. And then we move on to operations, which most people are familiar with. In terms of police departments, almost everybody in a uniform, and which is patrol services, and emergency preparedness actually falls under that. Our traffic and safety program, our youth services, or what we call SRO, school resource officer, our photo enforcement that we have in our city, the PIO, public information officer, our parking enforcement, and then our homeless liaison officer team, as well as our terrorist liaison officer, which isn't listed here. And then we have a regional SWAT team that we dedicate or have so many officers that are dedicated to be on that team as we share the burden and the resources available to that team. And we also have RACES and CERT volunteers under the same operations division captain. Now the next slide is kind of how we look. You have one chief, two captains. We have 4 patrol sergeants, 1 detective sergeant. I have here, you'll see 1 police corporal currently, but 3 that we're looking to put back into this budget and restore that. And then police officers, we have 8 police officers, but we have 2 vacancies currently. And then we have 1 detective on, and we have 1 detective that's vacant. We're using a PERS annuitant currently, and have been for just slightly over a year. That's been working part-time and helping to fill that spot since we've been so understaffed. And then if you see in the red, the support services manager, which is the 1 position that we're asking in this budget as well. And that's to help with our emergency operations, disaster preparedness, our social media platforms, and the communications with the public, and all the community outreach programs that we do. Once again, you see that our reserve police officer is part of that photo enforcement. We use 2 part-time folks to assist us with that. We have 2 records clerks, our department secretary, community liaison officer, the emergency services coordinator that I think some of you are already familiar with, Robert Acosta, was the retired division chief for Orange County Fire Authority. And then our police aides, we normally have 4, but we're currently working with 3 with one unfilled right now. It says, next slide please, looking forward, the whole premise, or the whole expectation of this budget is to get us back to our allotted 24 positions, and with that allotted 24 positions, that's where everything stems from. We're able to reduce the overtime budget a little bit because we'll have enough. Those vacancies will be filled in those 3 corporal positions, essentially. And that'll allow us to run our crews with a watch commander or patrol sergeant, as well as 1 officer in the north end, 1 officer in the south end, and then a corporal acting as a cover officer on calls for 2-person calls where they will switch between north and south. The beauty of this system with the corporals is that if a sergeant calls in sick, goes on vacation, or has to go to training, the corporal is a quasi-supervisor. And in that role, they're able to step in and backfill that sergeant without having to pay them overtime. And the other half of that coin is the other side of that coin is, if an officer were to call in sick, have vacation, or any reason to have to take leave, that corporal will serve as a police officer, handle a beat, and so we'll run a little bit short that night. But it is actually a great working system to have. Go ahead, next slide, Craig. Thank you.
Chief, if
Sorry.
Mayor, if I may make one comment that in looking at your budget, I think you're on the money here. The one comment I would make is having been involved with police budgets for a lot of years, I do like the idea that the support services manager can assume more of the management, operation, and day-to-day administrative work of the police department, freeing up the captains to do police work. So I think that's a good approach, and I think the more administrative work that person can do, so we're not having to pay captains salary to do administrative work, the better.
Exactly, and that's a great point. And one of the things too is that some of those positions or those duties are being, I won't say unsupervised, but they don't have a direct management control over them. So it would be nice to have that feature or function. All right, next slide is our, it's kind of by the numbers, right? The police, oh, you can go ahead and skip this slide. We'll move on to this because this is where it's going to tell you. It's really by the numbers, and you can see that, you know, we've written, you know, 1,779 parking citations last year. I'm going to tell you something. 2020 was just a strange year altogether, right? So some of these numbers don't make a lot of sense. They won't be the same as they were last year. Our calls for service were a little bit down. The reports taken was definitely down, but those calls for service are divided in two things. One is actual people calling us, and then our officers' self-initiated activity. The officers' self-initiated activity actually went up. So even though those folks were at home and weren't calling us because of COVID and everything else going on, they were out there actually doing a lot of crime prevention or proactive law enforcement. So if you look there, it gives our breakdown of our officers again and how many Part 1 crimes, and you can see that the Part 1 crimes inched up, obviously. We've been having a lot of auto thefts and burglaries. This is a function of, I believe, of Sacramento, to be honest with you, of some of the legislation that has made kind of a turnstile approach where people are going in and out of jail, or not even actually going in because of $0 bail, because of COVID right now, and then that's part of the legislative package as well this year, looking at $0 bail. The one number on this whole thing, if I can, you know, get you focused on that, is the response to priority 1 calls for service. This is when someone, you know, from our community is calling the police because there's something happening in progress. It just happened, or it's happening right now, and they need police there immediately. When I came on a little over 5 years ago, priority 1 calls for service were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, 2:36. You can see with having less officers out on the field being able to respond to these calls, how this is, you know, inched up to now 3 minutes, 3.78 minutes, almost 4 minutes to get there. And I can tell you that extra minute or so, it's an eternity for folks if when you really need an officer. And I've been in that situation with the medical situation at home with my child, so I know what that minute feels like waiting for the fire department to get there. But this is one of the things that you're going to greatly impact by this budget, and you're going to actually make a big difference for our community, is because they're going to be able to see that number go down. They're going to get the police there a lot more rapid than they were before.
Chief, are we going to make it under 3?
We're going to make it under 3. We're going to make it more like 2.5 again and get back down to what's, you know, reasonable and what the expectation is. And then the last slide is just our challenges and goals. You know, we obviously have recruitment as a continuous challenge, and I think that's everybody in law enforcement, and not just in law enforcement, in any kind of municipal government. The recruitment issue is the issue, and then of course there's going to be a chief recruitment coming up here shortly. The other challenge is Public Records Act. With the new several pieces of legislation that we're dealing with as a law enforcement agency, is forcing us to do a lot more Public Records Act requests, and that takes, you know, more staff to do, more staff time, and then they're also having a retention of those records now. At least it's on the books and it's going through committee, those retention and some of those records are going to 15 years. You know, this is what it looks like, and so there's that. And then RIPA, if you're not familiar with, RIPA is the Racial Identity Profiling Act, which passed in 2015, and it's been phased in over large agencies all the way down to, like, I think we are in wave 3 now, and we will be subject to having to meet the RIPA requirements. And what that is essentially is every person we stop in contact, the officer has to use their own wits and figure out what they believe this person is, their ethnic, and there's about 12 data points they have to fill out on these cards, and all of this stuff gets transmitted to Department of Justice in Sacramento. And so this is going to be more time consuming on our officers' time. I did look into a recent case right now where San Diego PD actually brought a suit against Sacramento and said, hey, listen, the DOJ is saying that we spent over $3 million, I think, to put this in place, and they spend about $1 million every year of officer time trying to do this, and it was an unfunded mandate. And what they're getting now is they're saying, yes, we will go ahead and fund you for that. So now they've opened the floodgates, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping to pursue as well, and the next chief that comes on after me to pursue that is the cost for that mandate. And then obviously the goals, we have a record specialist, like I was saying, the RIPA and our PRAs. In the future, we're looking at another record specialist and a part-time crime analyst. We're coming on line, or we're coming up with a staff report for you to review on a pilot program on our automated license plate readers, body-worn cameras. We know that's incredibly important because of all that's going on, and people are being accused of things that they did or didn't do. We need to have that information there for us. Our past motor for traffic enforcement. We don't have anybody on our mutual aid or our regional SWAT team, and so we're not really pulling our weight as an agency, and we need to do that. So we need to get those numbers up again back to 24 so that we can have folks on the SWAT team as operators, as SWAT team members, and then the Explorer program, reinstill that. Most of that was put down because of COVID. We had a pretty good following prior to that, and just maintaining our patrol fleet and maybe a future canine program sometime down the road.
Hey, Chief, I had a
Yes.
Is this working? Is it? Okay. I have a couple crystal ball questions. So given the current environment and our past history of challenges to be able to hire officers, how hard is it going to be to find 6 new officers? Because I just in watching what's going on, I'm not sure if a lot of young boys now want to be police officers. Are there challenges that you're going to see in trying to find 6 new officers?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges, obviously the things we've seen already, like in the news, and a lot of pressure on law enforcement itself, whether they're, questioning, the profession. So there's a lot of focus on that, just in nature, so people aren't choosing that profession. So that's another, and the other challenge is there's some legislation that's making the requirements even higher to become a police officer, like there's an assembly person that has a bill in place that that says that they have to be at least 25 or have a bachelor's degree. Well, that's going to make that pool very, very narrow. So we're hoping to, beat that. But I think the other thing is even if all things were perfect, right, and we were hiring folks, there's an attrition rate that's a natural attrition rate that occurs at our agency and agencies like our agency because of the size, right? And for that reason alone, I've had a number of discussions with the city manager about having an overhire kind of concept, because we never stay, it seems like, at that 24 for any length of time. Maybe 9 months, maybe, or 6 months, and then you're looking at somebody leaving again. So yeah, I think that would help to kind of deal with that challenge, is to make sure that we always have somebody in the hopper, so to speak, and different stages, because it's just going to be a constant process of recruitment. And then the other part is all of the things that you guys are talking about doing right now in this budget, or looking at, or we're talking about doing, and you're considering, all of those things are really things that help retain people because of all the special assignments. And part of it is because we have a lot of people that are getting burned out working a lot of overtime and not being able to go to the training that we would like them to go to because we can't get backfill for them to go to the training. So this is going to help in a great way to help meet that recruitment challenge.
Okay, yeah, that legislation of the 25 and a bachelor's is troubling because you're going to lose a lot of military people that went out of high school into the military, and they're great police officers once they get back into civilian life. And then also another crystal ball question, and I'll hold you to this. How long will it take to hire 6? If we said go, let's do it, because I know hiring police officers, you don't put an ad in the Orange County Register, and you know it's months and months and months of background checks and interviews and testing and everything.
Well, I know that we're doing, we just did some interviews because of the backfill, just of the regular, of our couple officers that are vacant right now, but I know that Captain Byerly and Captain O'Connell did some interviews last week. They're doing some tomorrow and I believe Thursday for those positions. To hire the rest, I would say that, and I'm a little bit aggressive, but I believe it's possible, probably within 18 months from the adoption of this budget.
And it might benefit us that we're a sleepy little town. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So Mayor and Council, last two departments. The first one's non-departmental. These are expenditures that include such things as contracted services that are not associated with a specific department, retiree health insurance cost, credit card processing fees, and contribution to North Spa Homeless Shelter. Interfund operating transfers out of the general fund are projected to increase for fiscal year 21-22, primarily due to increase in transfers. Self-insurance fund 54, that's for higher anticipated insurance policy. Building and fund 25 for higher anticipated expenditures for infrastructure improvements, and technology replacement fund 53 related to higher anticipated technology replacement costs.
Craig, I noticed in your, in terms of looking forward, I saw a grant here from OCTA. I think I mentioned that to Chet. Can you tell us what that's all about, and is there any matching involved? And
I'm going to ask
Ron.
Ron Noda to step in with that one. I believe that the OCTA grant was for 16, or our matching portion was 16 grand.
Right.
Correct. That is part of the storm drain covers. So it's a $80,000 grant, but the city has to match, I believe, 20%. So it's roughly 16,000.
and that's going to bring all the storm drain covers.
So the
Cover
state is mandating that we do 2 storm drain covers, one on the outside and one on the inside. So a few years ago, we did apply for the grant, received it, installed the grates that are on the currently outside.
Right.
Now we have to do it on the inside.
Got it.
Correct.
Craig, why don't you go ahead and move forward to the proposed budget expenditures, just so that we can get to the bottom line.
Okay. So this slide represents the proposed expenditure fiscal year 21-22. Total expenditures and operating transfers out of approximately 16.7 million.
So we're going to have Ron actually take us through the draft improvement program quickly. I think, and he already, I think, touched on probably the most, I think, insightful, or I think the most impressive part of this plan is that it is aggressive, and essentially that what we're proposing to put on the street is about 5 times more in project dollars than the city has done historically. That's a very large undertaking, and I'm confident in just the way that we've set it up that we'll be able to actually put those out and have them executed quickly.
Thank you. So part of the spending pledge is to increase the quality of life for the city of residents, businesses, nonprofits of Los Alamitos. So again, like Chet mentioned, we have a very ambitious capital improvement fund to basically beautify the city. So some of the projects include paving of streets. So, you know, we have, give you an example, agenda item tonight of some paving of, I believe it's Suburbia and Howard Street in Apartment Row. Again, like I mentioned in my previous PowerPoint, when we went through development services, we're pushing out approximately $1.6 million in terms of CIP projects. But again, approximately 240,000 of that is only coming out of general fund. We're using multitude of other funding sources such as SB1, gas tax, Measure M, and of course some carryovers of Measure M money from the previous fiscal year. Again, we have median projects, we have a generator project for the Civic Center emergency generator project. We're completing, and we're doing, because we're not going to complete it this fiscal year, is some planning stuff like housing updates, town center mixed use updates. We just have a list of arterial street signs, beautification of parks, beautification of like I said, medians. So again, we have a lot going on, but I'm very confident that we can do it. I got the whole team ready to go. And again, it is ambitious, but I'm very confident that we can do it. And again, when we get down to it, we will have definitely checks and balances to make sure that staff is accountable to get these projects done in an appropriate time frame.
If, again, Mr. Mayor, if I may comment, I agree with you. It's very aggressive, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of coordination to make it happen. I would certainly suggest, and I know you've probably considered this, if you get into a jam, let's not think that city staff has to do everything. There may be opportunities here where we can contract some of this out to the private sector to help us out if we can't handle the entire workload to get the projects completed. So I just say that as an observation. I think maybe some of the other council members might agree with me, but that's something we can discuss more if we need to. I think we'd like to see the projects completed.
So this is a 5-year look at the proposed budget and expenditures beginning with fiscal year 21-22. We can see that the projected budget surplus begins in fiscal 21-22 of approximately $2.2 million. That then grows and increases as we move forward in the 5-year forecast. Quick look at the fund balance review. The beginning general fund balance as provided in the audited financial statements was, for 1920, was $10.3 million. This included committed reserves of $3.4 million. That's for emergencies. It's 25% of the expenditures. Assigned of $4.4 million. This is for OPEB, $500,000, and $3.6 for PERS reserve. And then unassigned reserve of approximately $2.5 million. The estimated surplus, as you was shown, was for 21-22 will be $2.2 million. This will leave an ending general fund balance for 21-22 of approximately $12.5 million. Of course, this will be subject to change with we add any additional CIP projects.
So council, that roughly takes us to the end of the presentation, but I did want to mention a few things. That the budget as currently constructed does propose a very aggressive CIP project. It does, our project list, it does propose a fairly aggressive modernization of our internal workings of the city, putting people in the correct places in order to be able to properly manage all of the projects that we have going forward, to look at ways to constantly improve upon customer service, and also developing these what I'll call touch points for the community that I think our community would expect in terms of ease of access and transparency. Some of the things that I think this body will obviously want to consider moving forward is that given the setup that we have proposed, there is a $2.2 million surplus that is currently being contemplated. That also, another point that should be taken into effect or into account is the American Rescue Plan money that is also going to be coming to the city here in the near future. And that accounts for $2 million of one-time money that can then be deployed for infrastructure projects, for economic development, as well as lost revenue and internal operations that are related to COVID-19 relief. These are just some of the ideas that staff has been working on that we would continue to build out as we go through the budget process and as we have more conversations with all of you and the Budget Study Committee. The first would be a residential street improvement project, which essentially would see us disperse about $1.6 million of Measure Y funding into residential streets. We would be doing this throughout the city, hitting different neighborhoods and hitting different districts to ensure that we're spreading all of that good work all around the city. Next, we'll be looking at a series of economic development incentives or initiatives where we would hopefully look to partner with our business community in order to try to lift the overall tide of all ships. Next, would also be looking at a park beautification project where we would look to touch each one of our parks and be able to rededicate that, while we also look for opportunities for increased park space throughout the city. Obviously, we are at this moment park deficient in terms of our square footage. Next, obviously, a goal that's, I think, near and dear to my heart, but I think very easily achievable is becoming a Tree City USA. I think that just driving around mature neighborhoods, you can see the value of having trees and how it actually brings communities together. Next, obviously, anything that we can do to improve the overall look of how exactly our city comes together. Most of those are public spaces, so the medians and the way that the boulevards all work together are going to be things that we would also look to try to improve. And another main issue that does fall within the FSB is looking at our future obligation and how exactly we might take advantage of having a little extra capital in order to potentially pay down those needs sooner than we currently anticipate. And so we are looking at a number of different models, from the 115 trust all the way to snowball payments in order to try to speed up that process. And we're going through that with we'll be looking at some actuarial data in order to see which ones actually work for us. With that, I obviously open it up to the council for questions. I know that we'll have an opportunity with each of you to do a deeper dive into each one of these during your one-on-one meetings. But obviously, any general comments, we obviously would welcome those as we continue to work.
I mean, my one general comment I have, and then I'll pass it to others if they have any comments, is that you know, we appreciate over the years, the last few years, we've been in a cutting mode and a mode where we've put off many needed projects, capital improvements, economic development, a lot of things. And now we're at a point, not just because of Measure Y, but because of some of the things we've put in place where we can hopefully implement a measured improvement in our city services, in our capital improvement projects, to modernize our city for the benefit of all our residents. And one great example of this is our police department's been understaffed for many years, and now we're at the point where you know, it's affecting our response times, and it has been affecting our response times. Our officers have been overworked, and I think, at least from my perspective, I'm happy that we're in a place where we can get back to at least the minimum level of staffing for the police department and otherwise as well, and also take on these capital improvement projects through Ron's good work. You know, a lot of that money's not even coming out of our general fund, but it's something that I'm looking forward to. I appreciate the aggressive plan there, Ron, and I'm excited on behalf of the city that we're gonna make all of these improvements, both in terms of our inner workings, but also in terms of things that our residents come to see, including additional police officers and projects and improved streets and things like that. In terms of where we go next, Chet, next month we're going to have the budget before us, is that right?
That is, yes, sir.
Okay, and some of these additional ideas, we're gonna flush these out in individual meetings, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And potentially come back with some direction in the June meeting? Okay. All right, that sounds like a plan. Does anyone else have any questions or
Yeah,
comments?
I just had a couple comments. I know we talked about the future obligations, which is the elephant in the room of the pension liability. And I just want to make sure that that's not an afterthought, that it does become a priority. I know it's not real sexy. Can I say that? Yeah, I did. But it's something that got us in this mess in the first place, and I want to get to the point in our city that we never have to say that word again. So just make sure that we have, at Fire Authority, we have a snowball payment that's actually in our bylaws. We're going to pay a certain amount until we're at 85%. And there's a number of mechanisms in there with, if there's a downturn in the city or whatever, we can take that back. But I just want to make sure that we have a formalized plan so we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then, what else? Oh, and then also on these things, I know, we're kind of looking over a 2-year time. So if we could maybe in next month's meeting for the budget summary, if we can take some of these positions and some of these events and slot them into what fiscal year we think they're going to happen, because if we look at it all up front, it's overwhelming. But if we say this is going to happen in 21, 22, or 22, 23, I think it'll give us a better handle of what we'll look like.
Of
But
course.
nice job. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, I think you did a great job of summarizing the council's position. I would just maybe emphasize one thing, and excuse me, and that is I'll look forward to seeing the city returning to police response times under 3 minutes. I think that's really important. That really shows a level of respect for our residents and a level of delivering critical services to the citizens in a very timely manner. So I think that's one real critical benchmark of this new budget.
Excellent. With that, we will adjourn the special meeting. We have our regularly scheduled meeting next. Does anyone need a break? Yes, all right. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Mr. Mayor, also, I believe that there is some presentations or photos that need to be taken as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Emmeline so she can tell us all where we need to be.
Good evening again. We wanted to do a quick picture of our ribbon cutting for the lobby renovation. We have our Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts Commission members here as well to join you for a quick picture in the lobby.
Sounds good. Is the whole council invited?
The whole council.
Oh, man.
Not just you. You got to have some eye candy in there, too.
Testing? Oh, yeah. All right. So,